I was standing in my backyard in Tucson, Arizona, staring at my perfectly legal storage shed when I saw Brenda Hawthorne marching across the grass with a clipboard in her hand, and that look on her face that every homeowner in Saguaro Ridge Estates had learned to dread. The look that said she had found something to complain about and was about to make it everyone's problem. "Mr. Sterling," she called out in that nasally voice that could cut through concrete, "we need to talk about your structure." I set down the hedge trimmer I had been cleaning and wiped my hands on my jeans. "It's a shed, Brenda, and we've been through this. I got approval for it 2 years ago." She stopped about 3 feet from me, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair not moving despite the October breeze. Everything about Brenda screamed suburban dictator. From her crisp white polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on it, to her pressed khaki capris and pristine white tennis shoes. She was 52 years old and had been the president of our homeowners association for the past 7 years. A reign of terror that had seen complaints about everything from the wrong shade of beige on someone's mailbox to a kid's basketball hoop being 2 inches too tall. "That was before we had the common areas properly assessed," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "According to our recent measurements, your shed is encroaching on HOA property by at least 18 inches. I felt my jaw tighten. "That's impossible. I had the property lines checked before I built it. The shed is well within my lot. Our measurements say otherwise." She thrust a piece of paper at me. "You have 30 days to remove the structure or relocate it to comply with the property boundaries. Failure to do so will result in daily fines of $100 until the violation is corrected." I took the paper and scanned it quickly. It was an official-looking notice with the HOA letterhead, citing some obscure covenant about structures not being permitted on common areas. At the bottom was a crude diagram supposedly showing my shed overlapping into what they claimed was association property. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I'm not moving anything based on some drawing you made. If you want to claim my shed is on your property, you'll need actual proof." Brenda's face turned a shade of red that clashed with her artificial tan. "The HOA board has authorized this action, Mr. Sterling. We have every right to enforce our covenants." "Then I have every right to verify your claims," I shot back. "I'm getting a licensed surveyor out here, and when they confirm what I already know, that my shed is completely on my property, I expect an apology and a retraction of this nonsense." "You do what you need to do," she said primly, "but the clock is ticking. 30 days, Mr. Sterling. Not 31. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house 4 doors down, leaving me standing there with a piece of paper that was about to cost me money I hadn't planned on spending. My wife Sarah had warned me about buying in an HOA community. We had moved here from Phoenix 3 years ago because the schools were good and the neighborhood seemed quiet. But somewhere between signing the paperwork and moving in, I had underestimated just how much power a bored, middle-aged woman with too much time on her hands could wield. I walked back into the house through the sliding glass door. Sarah was in the kitchen making dinner, and our 2 kids were in the living room doing homework. At least, my 14-year-old son Marcus was doing homework. My 11-year-old daughter Lily was supposed to be doing homework, but was probably on her phone. "What did Brenda want?" Sarah asked without looking up from the pot she was stirring. "She's claiming my shed is on HOA property." That got her attention. Sarah turned to face me, her dark brown eyes widening. "What? That's insane. You had everything measured before you built it." "I know. She's given me 30 days to move it or start paying daily fines." "Can she do that?" "According to the covenant, if a structure is on common property, yeah, they can fine us. But my shed isn't on common property. I'm calling a surveyor tomorrow." Sarah sighed and went back to stirring. "This is exactly the kind of thing I was worried about. These HOAs always find something." She was right, but I didn't want to admit it. I had thought the rules and regulations would be minor, just keeping people from painting their houses purple or parking boats in their driveways. I hadn't anticipated that the HOA president would have a personal vendetta against anyone who didn't bow down to her authority. The next morning, I started calling surveyors. The first 3 I tried were booked out for weeks. The fourth, a company called Precision Land Surveying, said they could fit me in the following Tuesday if I didn't mind paying a rush fee. I didn't have much choice, so I agreed to their quote of $850. It stung, but it would be worth it to prove Brenda wrong. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and temperatures in the low 70s. Perfect weather for outdoor work. The surveyor, a lean man in his 30s named Tom Garcia, showed up at 8 o'clock sharp with a younger assistant and enough equipment to make it look like they were planning a moon landing. Tom was professional and thorough, asking to see my original property survey and the permits I had pulled for the shed. "This is pretty straightforward," Tom said after reviewing my documents. "Your property corners should be marked with iron pins. We'll locate those, verify the boundaries, and measure the position of your structure relative to the property line. How long will it take? Couple hours, maybe 3. We need to be precise." I left them to their work and went inside to tackle some emails for my job. I worked in IT consulting and had the luxury of working from home most days, which meant I was here to witness all of Brenda's HOA antics firsthand. Around 10:30, I saw her walk past my house slowly, clearly trying to see what was happening in my backyard without being too obvious about it. I smiled, let her wonder. At 11:15, Tom knocked on my front door. He had his tablet in hand and a satisfied expression on his face. "Got your results," he said. "You want the good news or the good news?" I felt a wave of relief. "Hit me." "Your shed is completely on your property. Not only is it not encroaching on any common area, it's actually 3 feet inside your property line. Whoever told you it was over the boundary was either measuring wrong or lying. Can you put that in writing?" "Already done." He handed me the tablet, which showed a detailed plot plan with measurements and calculations. "I'll email you the full report with our certification and seal. This is legally defensible if you need it to be." "I think I will need it to be. Thank you." After Tom and his assistant left, I immediately printed out 3 copies of the report. One for me, one for the HOA board, and one to keep in reserve just in case. Then I composed an email to the entire HOA board, attaching the surveyor's report and politely but firmly stating that my shed was in full compliance with all property boundaries, and requesting that the violation notice be withdrawn and expunged from any HOA records. I got a response within 20 minutes, but not from Brenda. It was from Gary Mitchell, the vice president, who I had met a few times at neighborhood barbecues. Gary was a reasonable guy, a retired accountant who seemed to serve on the board mostly to keep Brenda from running completely unchecked. "Frank," the email read, "thank you for providing this documentation. I'll bring it to the board's attention at our meeting Thursday evening. Between you and me, I had concerns about Brenda's measurements from the start. I'll be recommending we withdraw the notice." That was encouraging, but I knew Brenda well enough to know she wouldn't give up that easily. Sure enough, Thursday afternoon I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Sterling, this is Brenda Hawthorne. I wanted to discuss the situation with your shed before tonight's board meeting." "What's there to discuss?" "I provided a professional survey showing it's completely on my property. The board has questions about the validity of that survey, We'd like to commission our own surveyor for an independent verification. I felt my blood pressure rising. Brenda, you're not listening. The survey I paid for is from a licensed professional. It's legally certified. You can't just ignore it because you don't like the results. The HOA has the right to verify claims made by homeowners. This isn't a claim, it's a fact. My shed is on my property. Your notice was wrong. End of story. There was a long pause. We'll discuss it at the meeting tonight. You're welcome to attend. I'll be there. The HOA meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a modest building near the neighborhood pool that also housed a small gym and a party room that could be rented out. I arrived at 6:45 for the 7 o'clock meeting and found about a dozen other residents already there, sitting in the folding chairs that had been arranged in rows. Sarah had decided to come with me for moral support, which I appreciated. Brenda sat at a table at the front of the room with the other 4 board members. Gary Mitchell, Treasurer Helen Ortiz, Secretary Robert Chen, and Member-at-Large Patricia Doyle. Brenda was shuffling papers and whispering to Patricia, who was one of her loyal supporters and generally voted however Brenda wanted her to vote. The meeting started with the usual boring stuff: approval of last month's minutes, a financial report from Helen, a discussion about repainting the clubhouse exterior. Then we got to new business, and Brenda's eyes locked onto me. We have an ongoing property dispute with Mr. Frank Sterling regarding a storage structure that the HOA believes encroaches on common area, she began. Mr. Sterling has provided a survey claiming the structure is within his property boundaries, but the board needs to discuss how to proceed. Gary cleared his throat. Brenda, I think calling it a dispute is a bit strong. Mr. Sterling provided a certified survey from a licensed surveyor showing his shed is 3 feet inside his property line. Unless we have specific evidence to contradict that, I don't see what there is to discuss. The survey could be inaccurate, Patricia chimed in, right on cue. Based on what? Gary asked, his tone sharpening. Do you have credentials in land surveying, Patricia? I'm just saying we should verify it ourselves. At whose expense? Helen asked. She was a practical woman in her 60s who had always struck me as fair-minded. If we commission another survey and it shows the same thing, we've wasted association funds. And if we're wrong, we could be opening ourselves up to legal liability for harassment. I agree with Helen, Robert said quietly. He was usually the most reserved member of the board, but when he spoke, people listened. Mr. Sterling followed the proper procedures when he built his shed. He got approval from this board 2 years ago. He has now provided documentation from a professional surveyor. Unless someone can point to a specific flaw in that survey, I move that we withdraw the violation notice and close this matter. I second that motion, Gary said immediately. Brenda looked like she had swallowed a lemon. All in favor? Gary, Robert, and Helen all raised their hands. Patricia kept hers down, and Brenda obviously voted against it. Motion carries 3-2, Gary said with satisfaction. The violation notice against Mr. Sterling is withdrawn. Make sure that's noted in the minutes, Robert. I felt Sarah squeeze my hand. It should have been over right there. I should have been able to go home, forget about the whole stupid situation, and get on with my life. But as we were standing up to leave, Brenda made her way over to us. Don't think this is finished, she said in a low voice. I know what I measured and I know what I saw. That shed is on common property and eventually I'll prove it. Brenda, you need to let this go, I said. You lost. Move on. We'll see who loses, Mr. Sterling. Over the next 2 weeks, things were quiet, too quiet. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it finally did on a Saturday morning in early November. I was out front raking leaves when I noticed orange spray paint on my lawn, marking out lines that ran from the street all the way back toward my house. The lines cut across several properties on my side of the street, including mine. I was staring at the markings when my neighbor 2 houses down, an elderly man named Walter Simmons, walked over. "You see this nonsense?" Walter asked, gesturing at the orange paint. "Showed up sometime during the night. Any idea what it is?" HOA hired some outfit to mark the property boundaries. Got a notice in my mailbox this morning. He handed me a piece of paper that looked identical to one I found in my own mailbox when I checked. "They're claiming all of us have encroachments. My fence, your shed, the Martinez's garden bed, says we all have to correct violations or face fines." I read the notice with growing anger. This wasn't about my shed anymore. Brenda had apparently decided that if she couldn't get me on a violation, she'd cast a wider net and see what she could catch. The problem was that the orange lines on the ground didn't match any property boundaries I knew about. According to those markings, my property line was a good 6 feet closer to my house than it actually was. "This is insane," I muttered. "It's harassment is what it is," Walter said. "My fence has been in the same spot for 20 years. It was here when I bought the house. Now suddenly it's on HOA property. I don't think so." By Monday morning, a group of about 8 affected homeowners had formed an informal alliance. We met at Walter's house that evening, sitting in his living room and comparing notes. Besides Walter and me, there was Jose and Carmen Martinez, whose raised garden bed was apparently now on common property according to Brenda's measurements. There was Denise Foster, a single mom whose kid's swing set was supposedly over the line. There was retired police officer Doug Ramsey, whose decorative boulder landscaping was in violation, and there were 3 others with various issues. "We need to pool our resources," Jose said. He was a lawyer, though he practiced family law, not property law. "If we each hire our own surveyors, we're looking at thousands of dollars. If we hire one surveyor to do all our properties at once, we can split the cost." "I already had a survey done," I reminded them. "It showed my shed is 3 feet inside my property line." "But did it show the actual boundary line in relation to the common area?" Jose asked. "What we need is someone to come out and definitively mark where HOA property begins and where our individual lots end. Then we can compare that to these ridiculous spray paint markings." We agreed to split the cost of hiring Tom Garcia to come back out and do a comprehensive survey of the affected properties. This time, the bill would be closer to $3,000, but split 8 ways, it was manageable. Tom agreed to fit us in the following week. In the meantime, Brenda wasn't sitting idle. Notices started appearing on people's doors threatening fines if the violations weren't corrected within 30 days. The daily fines ranged from $50 to $150, depending on the supposed severity of the encroachment. I got another notice claiming my shed would cost me $100 per day starting December 1st if it wasn't removed or relocated. "She's doubling down," Sarah said when I showed her the new notice. "Why would she do that if she knows she's wrong? Because she can't admit she's wrong. Or because she has some other agenda we don't know about yet." The second survey took place over 3 days. Tom and his team were thorough, using GPS equipment and ground-penetrating radar to locate the original survey pins that established property boundaries when the neighborhood was first developed in 2008. What they found was illuminating and infuriating in equal measure. "Okay, here's what we've got," Tom explained at a meeting we held in the clubhouse on a Wednesday evening. He had brought a projector and was displaying a large map of the affected section of the neighborhood. "The orange markings that were spray painted on your properties do not correspond to any legally recorded property boundaries. In fact, whoever did that marking appears to have simply measured an arbitrary distance from the street and called it the property line. So where is the actual boundary? Denise asked. Tom used a laser pointer to indicate a line on his map. The common area consists of that strip of land between the street and the sidewalk, plus designated areas around the pool and clubhouse. The boundary between common area and private lots is clearly established in the recorded plat map from when this subdivision was created. Every single structure you've been cited for is completely within private property boundaries, not even close to the line. The nearest any of you come is Mr. Sterling's shed, which, as I reported before, is 3 feet inside his property line. The furthest is Mr. Simmons's fence, which is actually 12 feet from the boundary. 12 feet, Walter exclaimed. How in the hell did they claim my fence was encroaching? I can't answer that, Tom said diplomatically. I can only tell you what the actual boundaries are. We armed ourselves with copies of Tom's comprehensive report and requested an emergency board meeting. Gary Mitchell, bless him, supported the request and scheduled it for the following Monday evening. This time, the clubhouse was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood about what Brenda was doing, and even residents who weren't directly affected were angry about the HOA's tactics. The meeting was contentious from the start. Gary tried to maintain order as he presented Tom's survey results to the full board and the assembled residents. The map was displayed on the projector, and Tom himself was there to answer questions. As you can see, Gary said, gesturing to the screen, there are no encroachments on HOA property. The violation notices that were issued were based on incorrect information. I disagree with that characterization, Brenda said coldly. The HOA hired a professional to assess the boundaries. Who? Jose asked from the audience. Who did you hire, Brenda? What company? Brenda hesitated. That's not relevant. It's absolutely relevant, Jose shot back. You're threatening homeowners with thousands of dollars in fines. We have a right to know what your claims are based on. The board authorized the expense, Patricia said, trying to defend Brenda. Actually, no, we didn't, Helen said, flipping through a ledger. I don't have any record of payment to a surveying company. Brenda, did you personally hire someone? All eyes turned to Brenda. Her face was flushed, and she shuffled papers on the table in front of her without looking up. I had a consultant look at the properties, she finally admitted. What kind of consultant? Gary asked. A property assessor. A property assessor is not a licensed surveyor, Tom interjected. Property assessors evaluate home values for tax purposes. They're not qualified to establish legal boundaries. So you hired some random person to eyeball the properties, and then started threatening people with fines based on that? Doug Ramsey asked. He had been a cop for 30 years, and his tone carried the weight of someone who had seen plenty of petty tyranny in his time. Do you understand how far out of line that is? I was acting in the best interests of the association, Brenda said defensively. You were acting in your own interests, Gary said quietly. I don't know what your motivation is, Brenda, but this has gone too far. I move that all violation notices related to alleged boundary encroachments be immediately withdrawn, and that the HOA issue a formal apology to the affected homeowners. I second that, Helen said. All in favor. 4 hands went up. Gary, Helen, Robert, and even Patricia, who apparently had finally realized which way the wind was blowing. Brenda sat with her arms crossed, voting against a motion that was going to pass anyway. Motion carries, Gary announced. Brenda, I need you to draft that apology letter tonight and have it delivered to all affected homeowners by tomorrow afternoon. The meeting should have ended there, but Walter Simmons stood up. I appreciate the board doing the right thing, he said. "But I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, and I've watched this HOA become more and more aggressive under the current leadership. We've had people fined for having the wrong color flowers, for parking their cars in their own driveways overnight, for putting up Christmas decorations too early. And now this. I think it's time for new leadership. I'd like to call for a vote of no confidence in the current board president." The room erupted in applause and agreement. Gary looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. "That's within the rights of the homeowners according to our bylaws. We'd need a petition signed by at least 20% of homeowners to trigger a special election. If you can get that, we'll schedule it." Within 3 days, Walter had signatures from 40% of the neighborhood. People were fed up, and Brenda's boundary crusade had been the final straw. A special election was scheduled for December 10th, but Brenda wasn't going down without a fight. In the 2 weeks leading up to the election, she went on a campaign that would have made a presidential candidate blush. She went door to door, held a rally at the clubhouse, and sent out multiple emails defending her record and claiming that the homeowners trying to remove her were trying to destroy property values and turn the neighborhood into chaos. Most people saw through it, but she did have her supporters. There was a contingent of older residents who liked the strict enforcement of rules and believed the HOA's job was to maintain uniformity and standards. They didn't care that Brenda had been wrong about the property boundaries. They cared that she was tough on violations. The night of the election, the clubhouse was standing room only. Every homeowner who could be there was there, and the tension was palpable. The vote was done by secret ballot, with Helen and Robert counting since they were the 2 board members who weren't up for removal. Only Brenda's position was on the line. The rest of the board was staying in place. When the results were announced, it wasn't even close. 68% of homeowners had voted to remove Brenda as president. Gary Mitchell was appointed as interim president until a regular election could be held in the spring. I thought that would be the end of it. Brenda cleaned out her HOA files, handed over the passwords to the association's email and website, and stopped showing up to board meetings. For a few weeks, the neighborhood was peaceful. Then, in early January, I got a letter from a law firm. The letter claimed that I had slandered Brenda Hawthorne by making false statements about her competence and integrity, and that these statements had caused her emotional distress and damage to her reputation. It demanded a formal public apology and $25,000 in damages. I immediately called Jose Martinez, who read through the letter and started laughing. "This is frivolous," he said. "She doesn't have a case. Truth is an absolute defense against slander, and everything you said about her was provably true. Plus, you made your statements in the context of HOA business, which is protected speech. So I can ignore this. You need to respond, but yeah, we can fight this easily. I'll handle it for you. Consider it payback for organizing the survey that proved my garden wasn't on common property." Jose sent a response letter outlining why Brenda's claims were without merit, and suggesting that if she continued to pursue legal action, we would countersue for malicious prosecution and seek to recover attorney's fees. That should have been enough to scare off anyone with sense. Brenda didn't have sense. 2 weeks later, she actually filed a lawsuit in Pima County Superior Court. "She's actually doing this," I told Sarah, staring at the summons that had been served by a process server who showed up at my door on a Saturday morning. "Can she afford this?" "I mean, lawyers aren't cheap. I have no idea. Maybe she thinks I'll settle just to avoid the hassle." I wasn't going to settle. Jose assembled a defense that included affidavits from Tom the Surveyor, copies of all the HOA correspondence, and testimony from other homeowners about Brenda's pattern of behavior. We filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the lawsuit was a slap-suit strategic lawsuit against public participation intended to silence criticism of a public figure. The hearing on the motion to dismiss was scheduled for late February. I had to take the day off work to go to the courthouse downtown. Jose met me there, wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase full of documents. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Patricia Warren. She listened to Brenda's attorney, a young guy who seemed uncomfortable with the weakness of his case, make his arguments about how I had damaged his client's reputation. Then she listened to Jose systematically dismantle those arguments with facts and evidence. Mr. Sterling's statements were made in the context of HOA governance, Jose argued. He was exercising his right as a homeowner to question the actions of an elected official who was threatening him with financial penalties based on incorrect information. Miss Hawthorne's lawsuit is an attempt to chill free speech and punish a homeowner for proving her wrong. Judge Warren didn't take long to make her decision. "I'm granting the motion to dismiss," she said. "This lawsuit is clearly retaliatory in nature and lacks legal merit. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney's fees to the defendant. Miss Hawthorne, you have a right to your day in court, but you don't have a right to waste the court's time or to use litigation as a weapon against your neighbors. This case is dismissed with prejudice." Brenda looked stunned. Her attorney whispered something to her, and she shook her head vigorously. Then she stood up. "This is a travesty," she announced. "Mr. Sterling has been allowed to destroy my reputation, and now the court is rewarding him for it. I will appeal this decision." "That is your right," Judge Warren said calmly, "but I would strongly advise you to reconsider. You're not going to win on appeal, and you're just going to incur more costs." We walked out of the courtroom into the bright February sunshine. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. "How much is she going to owe me in attorney's fees?" I asked Jose. "I'll submit a request for around $8,000. That's what it cost me in time to defend this thing. She'll have 30 days to pay. What if she doesn't pay? Then we can pursue collection, potentially put a lien on her house. But let's hope it doesn't come to that." It did come to that. Brenda didn't pay within 30 days, and she didn't respond to follow-up demands. Jose initiated collection proceedings, which meant more legal paperwork and more hassle. By this point, I was exhausted by the whole situation. All I had wanted was to keep my shed in my backyard, and instead, I had spent 6 months dealing with HOA drama and lawsuits. Then things took a darker turn. In late March, Gary Mitchell called me with concern in his voice. "Frank, we have a problem. I've been going through the HOA's financial records, and there are some discrepancies. Money that should be in the reserve account isn't there." "How much money are we talking about?" "About $40,000. I felt my stomach drop. "Where did it go?" "That's what we're trying to figure out. Helen is going through everything with a fine-tooth comb, but it looks like there were a series of transfers made last year that weren't properly authorized or documented. I've reached out to Brenda for an explanation, but she's not returning my calls. You think she stole it? I think something inappropriate happened, and she's the only person who had the authority to make those transfers. We're going to have to bring in an auditor, and depending on what they find, we might need to involve the police." The auditor's report came back 3 weeks later, and it was damning. Over the course of 18 months, Brenda had made numerous unauthorized transfers from the HOA's reserve account to her personal account. The transfers were disguised as payments to vendors for services like landscaping and maintenance, but the invoices were fake. When auditors tried to contact the supposed vendors, They found that most of them didn't exist. The total amount of money missing was $43,712. Gary called an emergency HOA meeting to present the findings to the homeowners. The mood in the clubhouse was a mixture of shock and anger. People who had trusted Brenda, who had voted for her year after year, felt betrayed. People who had been fined and harassed by her felt vindicated but also furious that she had been stealing from them the whole time. The board has voted unanimously to refer this matter to the Tucson Police Department, Gary announced. This is beyond the scope of what we can handle internally. We're talking about theft, fraud, and possibly embezzlement. Those are serious crimes. What about the money? Someone called out. Can we get it back? We'll do everything we can, Helen said. We're working with our insurance company, and obviously if there's a criminal conviction, part of the sentencing could include restitution. But I can't make any promises. 2 detectives from the Tucson Police Department's white-collar crime unit showed up at Brenda's house on a Thursday morning in early April. I wasn't there to see it, but Walter was out for his morning walk and watched the whole thing. He came over to my house afterward to fill me in. They were there for about 2 hours, Walter said. Came out with boxes of documents and what looked like a computer. Brenda was crying and yelling about how this was all a witch hunt. Did they arrest her? Not right then, but I imagine that's coming. It came 3 days later. Brenda Hawthorne was arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The charges carried a potential sentence of up to 12 years in prison. She made bail and immediately hired a criminal defense attorney, a high-priced guy from Phoenix named Richard Templeton, who specialized in white-collar crime. The local news picked up the story. It wasn't every day that an HOA president got arrested for stealing from the neighborhood, and the reporters loved the angle. I got calls from 2 different TV stations asking for interviews. I declined, not wanting to turn the whole thing into more of a circus than it already was. Brenda's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the county attorney's office wasn't interested in going easy on her. The evidence was overwhelming, and they wanted to make an example out of someone who had abused a position of trust. The trial was scheduled for September, but in late August, Brenda's attorney called the prosecutor and said his client was ready to plead guilty to reduce charges. In exchange for pleading guilty to theft and fraud, the embezzlement charge would be dropped, and the prosecution would recommend a sentence at the lower end of the guidelines. The sentencing hearing was on September 20th. The courtroom was packed with residents from Saguaro Ridge Estates. Gary, Helen, and Robert were there representing the HOA. Jose came for moral support. Sarah came with me, and we sat in the back row. Brenda looked smaller than I remembered, standing next to her attorney in a conservative blue dress. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 6 months. The judge, a stern-looking man named Kenneth Foster, reviewed the case file and then asked Brenda if she understood the charges and wanted to change her plea to guilty. "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly. "Miss Hawthorne, you held a position of trust in your community. You were elected by your neighbors to manage their association and protect their interests. Instead, you stole from them. You used their money to fund your personal expenses. Can you explain to me why you did this?" Brenda was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I made terrible decisions. I was going through financial difficulties, and I convinced myself I would pay it back. But I didn't. I kept taking more, and I lied to cover it up. There's no excuse for what I did." The judge asked if anyone wanted to make a statement before sentencing. Gary stood up and spoke about how Brenda's actions had not only stolen money, but had destroyed trust in the community. He talked about how people were now afraid to participate in HOA governance because they had seen what could happen. Then the judge announced his sentence. Brenda was sentenced to 4 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections, with the possibility of parole after serving 18 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $43,712, plus court costs and fees. Additionally, she was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service upon her release. Brenda started crying. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder. The bailiff came forward to take her into custody, and she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Walking out of the courthouse into the bright September sunshine, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief that it was finally over. Satisfaction that justice had been served. But also a kind of sadness that it had come to this. All of this had started because Brenda had been wrong about my shed and couldn't admit it. If she had just backed down after the first survey, none of this would have happened. The financial investigation would never have been triggered, and she might have gotten away with the embezzlement. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked as we walked to the car. "Like I need a vacation," I said. "Somewhere far away from property lines and homeowner associations." "We should take the kids to California," she suggested. "Spend a week at the beach. Get away from all of this." "That sounds perfect." We did take that vacation, and it was exactly what we needed. When we got back to Tucson in October, things in the neighborhood had returned to something resembling normal. The HOA had elected a new board in a special election, with Walter Simmons as the new president. His first act was to propose amendments to the HOA bylaws that would require greater financial transparency and prevent any one person from having unchecked authority. The insurance company eventually paid out a claim that covered most of the stolen money, so the HOA's reserves were replenished. The new board took a much more relaxed approach to enforcement, focusing on actual issues that affected property values and safety, rather than nitpicking about minor violations. My shed remained exactly where it was, 3 feet inside my property line, storing my lawn equipment and tools. Every time I looked at it, I thought about the absurd chain of events it had triggered. A simple storage structure had exposed corruption, ended a petty tyrant's reign, and ultimately sent someone to prison. In early December, I got a letter from the Arizona Department of Corrections. It was from Brenda. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on yellow lined paper. Brenda's handwriting was shaky, not the precise script I remembered from all those HOA notices. "Mr. Sterling," it read. "I know you have no reason to accept anything I say, but I wanted to apologize. You were right about your shed. You were right about the property boundaries. I was wrong, and instead of admitting it, I made everything worse. I let my pride and my need to be in control destroy my life and hurt a lot of people who trusted me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong and I'm sorry. Brenda Hawthorne." I showed the letter to Sarah. "What are you going to do?" She asked. "Nothing," I said. "I don't need to respond. She's paying for what she did, and that's enough." I put the letter in a drawer and went back to living my life. The holidays came and went. Marcus got his driver's permit and started learning to drive. Lily joined the school's drama club and got a small part in the spring musical. Sarah got a promotion at her job. I took on a new client that kept me busy, but also came with a nice bonus. Life went on, and gradually the whole Brenda situation faded into the background, becoming one of those stories you tell at dinner parties. Did I ever tell you about the time our HOA president claimed my shed was on common property, and it ended with her going to prison for embezzlement. In March, I got a call from Jose. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. Brenda's attorney filed for early release. She's served 8 months, and he's arguing that she's been a model prisoner and has paid back a portion of the restitution. Is she going to get out? Probably not yet. The parole board usually wants to see at least 12 to 15 months for this kind of offense, but she'll likely get out before the full 4 years. Good for her, I guess, as long as she stays away from HOA governance. Part of her sentence includes a prohibition on serving in any fiduciary capacity for 10 years, so yeah, she won't be running any HOAs. Summer came, and with it the brutal Tucson heat. My shed, still standing exactly where I had built it, provided shelter for all the equipment I needed to maintain my yard. I had added some better shelving and organization systems, making it even more functional. It was, objectively, a nice shed. I was glad I had fought for it. One evening in late July, I was watering my plants when I saw a moving truck at Brenda's old house. I hadn't realized it had sold, but apparently someone new was moving in. A young family, by the looks of it, a couple in their early 30s with 2 small children. The next day, I walked over to introduce myself and welcome them to the neighborhood. The husband, whose name was David, was friendly and excited about the house. "It's our first time buying," he said. "We're so happy to be here. The HOA seems really organized and well run." I smiled. "It's gotten a lot better recently. If you ever have any questions about the neighborhood, feel free to ask. Actually, we were thinking about putting up a small shed in the backyard for storage. Is that okay with the HOA?" "Absolutely," I said. "Just make sure you get approval first and have your property lines confirmed. Trust me on that one." "Will do. Thanks for the advice." Walking back to my house, I thought about how much had changed in the past year and a half. The neighborhood that had been tense and divided under Brenda's rule was now a community again. People were friendlier. Board meetings were shorter and more productive. The HOA was doing what it was supposed to do, maintaining common areas and facilitating a pleasant neighborhood, not acting as a tool for one person's power trips. In October, I got a notice that Brenda had been granted parole. She would be released in early November after serving 14 months of her 4-year sentence. The conditions of her parole included continued restitution payments, regular check-ins with a parole officer, and community service. She would also not be allowed to hold any position involving financial responsibility or authority over others. I wondered what she would do with her life now. Her reputation was destroyed. Her marriage had ended in divorce while she was in prison. She had lost her house in the settlement with her ex-husband. She would be starting over from scratch at 54 years old. Part of me felt sorry for her. But mostly, I just felt relief that she was no longer my problem. Life continued its normal rhythm. The holidays approached again, marking nearly 2 years since the whole saga had begun. Walter organized a neighborhood party at the clubhouse, and for the first time in years, almost everyone showed up. There was food and music and kids running around. People were laughing and talking, enjoying being part of a community. I stood outside with a beer in my hand, looking up at the clear December sky. Sarah came out and stood next to me, slipping her hand into mine. "Happy?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I am." My shed was still standing in my backyard, 3 feet inside my property line, exactly where it belonged. It had been worth fighting for, not because the shed itself was so important, but because standing up to someone who was wrong, someone who abused their authority, was important. The ripples from that fight had exposed corruption and ultimately made our neighborhood a better place. Sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest victories. Sometimes a simple storage shed becomes the catalyst for change. And sometimes, when you stand your ground and insist on the truth, you win more than just the argument. You win your peace of mind, your community, and the satisfaction of knowing you did the right thing, no matter how difficult it was. As I stood there in my backyard on that cool December evening, looking at my perfectly legal, properly positioned shed, I knew I would do it all over again if I had to. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems absurd at the start. Property lines, truth, justice, and the right to build a shed on your own land without harassment from a power-hungry HOA president. Those things mattered. The following spring, the neighborhood held regular elections for the HOA board. Walter ran for president again and won in a landslide. 2 new members joined the board, including David, the young father who had moved into Brenda's old house. He had good ideas about modernizing some of the neighborhood systems and creating better communication channels between the board and residents. I was content to remain an ordinary homeowner, participating when needed but mostly just living my life. I had served my time in the trenches of HOA warfare, and I had no desire to repeat the experience. The last I heard about Brenda was from Helen Ortiz, who ran into her at a grocery store in early summer. Brenda was working as a cashier and living in a small apartment on the east side of Tucson. She looked tired but was polite when Helen spoke to her. She asked how the neighborhood was doing, and Helen gave her a brief update. Then they parted ways, 2 people whose lives had been connected by circumstance and conflict, but who now existed in completely separate worlds. I never saw Brenda again, and I was fine with that. Our paths had crossed in the worst possible way, but that chapter was closed. My shed stood as a monument to perseverance and truth, a simple wooden structure that had somehow become the centerpiece of a much larger story. As summer turned to fall and the temperatures in Tucson finally became bearable again, I spent my weekends working in my yard, pulling tools from my shed, maintaining my property, and enjoying the fruits of my labor. The grass was green, the plants were thriving, and my property line was exactly where it had always been, marked by iron pins and certified by professional surveyors. Sometimes neighbors would walk by and joke about my famous shed, and I would laugh along with them. It had become part of the neighborhood lore, the story that everyone told to newcomers as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of standing up for yourself. But mostly, it was just a shed. A practical, useful structure that held my lawn mower, my weed trimmer, my gardening tools, and various other implements of suburban life. It served its purpose well, and it would probably stand there for decades to come, long after everyone had forgotten the drama that had surrounded its existence. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Normal, peaceful, and entirely, completely, 3 feet inside my property line.